What's the dumbest mistake you've seen an incompetent coworker make? I used to work for a really difficult woman. She would go into her employees' documents and make changes without permission. She would delete lines and columns from spreadsheets, remove slides from presentations, and rewrite text. She did this to some of my work, so I learned to always keep a copy of my work somewhere she couldn't see it. One day, we were looking at a very detailed spreadsheet that took a long time to make. We were in a meeting with our whole team, and she started to criticize the spreadsheet very harshly. She deleted information and moved things around. By the end of her angry changes, she complained that the data didn't add up and asked why someone would show such a spreadsheet to the team. I explained that the data was correct at the beginning of the meeting, but because she had deleted columns and lines, it no longer made sense. She asked, "Well, who did this?" I replied that we could easily find out by looking at the document's history. With a few clicks, I showed the list of changes, and her name was on each one in the last 20 minutes. I clicked to show the document as it was when it was first presented with the correct totals. I was one of the few people who would stand up to her. Team 1, boss 0. Yikes, that's just bizarre and just straight up evil. Did she not understand that you can actually hide rows and columns instead of deleting them? Story 2. In the 1970s, I worked my way through college as a campus security patrol officer. I wasn't a police officer or even wanted to be one. We wore one-piece coveralls and walked in pairs around the dorm areas from midnight to 6 a.m., making sure doors weren't propped open and things like that. Other pairs patrolled other parts of campus, and there were usually 5 or 6 pairs on duty each night. We kept written records of everything that happened during our shifts on special 3-part NCR tear-out forms that came in pads. We had to make an entry every 20 minutes or so, and at the end of each shift, we turned in our logs. The chief of security read all the logs and sent copies to the housing department and the university president. The chief was a bit of a joke, like a wannabe southern sheriff, and he didn't like me at all because I had long hair. He decided he wanted to fire me, so he called me into his office and made up a reason, saying I hadn't turned in my log from the previous night. He showed me a pile of log sheets with mine missing as evidence. I really needed that job, and I couldn't let this happen. I wondered if the chief was really dumb enough to have sent copies of my log to the other offices while claiming he didn't have the original because it wasn't turned in. I knew the dean of housing from working on a dorm issue, so I quickly went to his office to ask if he had my log from the night before. He did. The dean wrote a formal letter to the chief saying he was upset that an important log had been lost in the chief's office. He attached a copy of my log so the chief could have a complete record. I could barely keep from laughing as I watched the chief's face turn red when he realized he'd been caught because of his own mistake. His apology for losing my log almost made me LOL. I got my job back and kept working there for another 2 years. The summer after I graduated, I worked at a nice hotel in town as a bellhop and room service waiter. There was a popular restaurant and a bar in the hotel. One day, the chief came in with his wife and teased me a bit about using my college degree to be a bellhop. I was happy to tell him that I had been accepted into law school and wouldn't be a bellhop for much longer. I also told him I'd never have to work a campus security job again. Story 3. I used to work as a float pharmacist. There was a lady who worked as a pharmacy assistant. All the employees of the grocery chain, except for the pharmacists, were part of a union. This lady was not very smart and often made careless mistakes, but she hadn't done enough wrong to get fired. When we fill out prescriptions, we take the orders from a list, scan the bottle of the medicine, and a label for the patient's medicine is printed. If the wrong medicine is scanned, the machine tells us and the label won't print. I think what happened was that she scanned the wrong bottle, went to get the correct one, scanned it again, bent down to get a container for the pills, and then she opened the wrong bottle of medicine, emptied it, opened the right bottle, and emptied that too. The prescription was for 200 pills, and most bottles only hold 100. She left the container on the counter for someone to check, and I always open the container to make sure the pills are correct. When I opened it, they looked right. Later, when the person came to pick up their medicine, the container was moved around while hanging in the pickup area, and I always opened it to show the person their medicine, which is also another check for me. To my surprise, I find the glyburide and the glycyloside were mixed together. I apologized and fixed the mistake, but I was very angry. She had put a high dose of glyburide in the bottle, and the person was supposed to take a low dose of glycyloside. This could have caused a very dangerous drop in sugar level because the person was old and both medicines make the body release more insulin. I told her she wasn't allowed to throw away any bottles anymore. She had to leave everything she touched on the counter. I also couldn't trust her to enter prescriptions or do anything else because she was so unreliable. She had worked there for about 9 months, and even with close supervision and training from the best assistants, she just didn't understand how to do things properly. I told her manager about what happened, and I think she was given a warning, but she eventually quit because everyone disliked her because of her mistakes. Story 4. We went on a field trip with a big group of 4 and 5-year-old kids to visit a farm, petting zoo, and a pumpkin patch. We had 3 vehicles to take us there. I was in charge of my own group, but I noticed another teacher wasn't watching her kids very closely most of the time. When it was time to go back, I helped my kids get on the bus and made sure to count them to see if everyone was there. Before I got on my bus, I saw the other teacher get on her bus and sit down before the kids even started to board. She walked on first and expected the kids to follow her. I almost didn't say anything, but something inside me told me she wasn't counting her students. After they all got on the bus, I walked back and got on her bus to check. She seemed annoyed when she saw I was there to make sure everything was okay. I wasn't her boss or anything, just another teacher, so she didn't have to listen to me. She said something like, "We're all here, let's leave." I knew how many kids were in each group, so without saying anything to her, I quickly counted the kids. And just as I thought, we were missing one. I left the bus to find the missing kid myself. He was still on the playground with kids from another school. When we got back to the bus, the other teacher blamed the kid for getting lost. She said he wandered off. But really, she was the one who left the play area without making sure all her kids were with her. She was angry when I told the school's administration about what happened. Story 5. I worked at a summer camp where most of the employees were college students. One time, we hired a guy who was in his early 40s. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal that he was older. He just acted like he was 20 years younger. But as time went on, his behavior became stranger. He got in trouble for weird things like working without a shirt. He would go canoeing and take off his shirt and life jacket, or he'd be lying in the park with no shirt on. Everyone felt uncomfortable around him because it seemed like he was trying to live his younger days all over again. We had an overnight training session that started at 9 a.m. and went on through the night until 3 p.m. the next day. Since it was a camp, we set up tents for the overnight part. He was acting normally at the beginning of the day, but he kept sneaking off to his tent for short periods. He had set up his tent far away from everyone else, so he would disappear for 10 or 20 minutes at a time. As the day went on, his behavior got weirder and weirder. He took off his shirt while our boss was talking and threw it into the fire, yelling, "Woo!" He started talking a lot about his ex-wife and even yelled at birds. Things got really uncomfortable when he started talking about inappropriate subjects. Around dinner time, he suddenly got up, ran to his car, and drove away so fast that his tires screeched. We thought, okay, he's gone, thank goodness, let's continue with our training. But an hour later, we heard his car speed back into the parking lot. Our manager shook her head and said, "Oh no, he's back." Soon after, we saw him running out of the woods at full speed and diving into the lake. He got out of the water, completely exposed, and walked over to where we were all sitting. He started spinning around with his arms out, and he put his arms around both of my bosses, saying he loved them. We could all smell the strong scent of drinks on him. He asked us when we were going to follow him and tried to get us to start the party. At that point, P was escorted out. Someone went to clean up his tent and found that he had been out of pop cans and had a bunch of bottles. The worst part was that he was supposed to work the next Monday at 11 a.m. and he texted us saying that he would be late because he had a meeting with the boss. Of course, he never showed up for that shift after what happened. And he still had a job after that? That went from odd to weird to strange, only to end completely off the rails just like the guy himself. Story 6. I did landscaping and janitorial work with a 60-year-old toothless Serbian man who hardly knew English and was a refugee. The owners of the company took pity on this guy since he was a bit of a poor guy and was trying to provide for his family, but he'd constantly do really stupid and odd things. For starters, one of the other groundskeepers put up one of those fake owls on top of one of the buildings. The guy, let's call him Bozo, thought it was real for the longest time and thought it put some voodoo on the place. I tried explaining that it wasn't, but he kept talking about it whenever we saw it. One day, I noticed shards of the owl all over the property and our boss reprimanding him about bringing a weapon to work. Another situation was when we were using this side scrubber to clean the factory floor. If you forgot to clean out the dirt every so often, it would just accumulate it all and push the dirt around, making dirty tracks around the floor. Well, as you can guess, Bozo was the kind of person to never clean out the scrubber no matter how long he ran it. While I was lawn mowing, he was doing that and turned a somewhat dusty floor into a pile of sludge. One of the owners noticed the security cameras and ran out of their office to him, stomping and yelling at him and stating, "If this isn't cleaned up by tomorrow, don't even think about coming in." Last story, the other owner's wife felt pity on the guy, so she wanted to do something charitable for him. She was cleaning out the owner's closet of clothes and figured to donate some of his old blazers and suits for Bozo so he'd look good at church and at events. Bozo instead started wearing the suits and blazers while he was working, remember, as a janitor and landscaper. I walked in one day and noticed Bozo on a riding mower and an old blazer. The owner came up to me and was like, I think that's my old blazer. He still works there, as far as I remember. Story 7. I worked in a place notorious for having bad recruiters and hiring bad temps. They had this one guy on a 3-month lease and we couldn't get rid of him fast enough in the summer of 2001. First, he claimed all these Microsoft certifications, and after a few days, we realized he didn't even know how to use a mouse or how scroll bars worked. So we put him in the worst detail. All he had to do was go to one of 20 popular websites and use a stopwatch to time how fast he clicked enter and how fast it took the web page to load. We were testing some web caching software, then he had to go on another machine with the software and do the same thing. He had never used a browser, so we had to teach him how that worked. The concept shocked him, and we wondered how an adult had lived in 2001 who didn't know how a browser worked. We knew he lied about the certifications at this point, but he had 90 days, so we were stuck with him. Very quickly, however, he discovered how to find some sites and started browsing that instead of testing websites. This was in the days of Microsoft Internet Explorer 5 or 6, so of course they became infected with pop-ups. We'd catch him at it and he'd deny it every time, and we'd have to completely wipe the desktop and reinstall Windows, only for him to do it again. We caught him doing it with other machines in the lab too. The guy literally had no impulse control, claiming the whole test lab was affected and just absolute lies that a kid would tell who had no idea how computers worked. Thank God we never caught him doing it, but I feared reviewing the lab security tape should have gotten all that. You were browsing sites again. We've told you many times that it's against company policy. No, I didn't. I'm literally looking at you browsing sites. That's not me. There's one on your taskbar. That was always there. You have a pop-up from another site. That was someone else who was here earlier. Who? You know that hairy guy, the one with a beard? There's no hairy guy with a beard who works in this lab. You've been the only one here besides me. I know, I saw him. He browses the site all the time. I was so glad to get rid of him. And yikes, this dude sounds like Patrick arguing with Man Ray about the wallet in real life, you know? Story 8. I worked in a grocery store for 12 years, and one day I was asked over the intercom to go to the receiving dock. I usually worked in the produce section, but the grocery manager needed help. We had just received a delivery, but the truck driver didn't use a load lock, which is a bar that keeps the products in place if the truck isn't full. Because of this, we had 9 full pallets of groceries that had fallen over and were broken. My job was to take pictures of the mess with my cell phone, and the grocery manager called our distribution center to tell them what happened. We had to take the truck keys away from the driver because he was fired right away. He had to find his own way home, which was a 4.5-hour drive from our store. The whole time, the driver was complaining that it wasn't his fault. He said that he couldn't be forced to provide his own load lock because he was an independent contractor. He caused about $10,000 worth of damage to the products, lost his job and any chance of driving a big truck in the state because he didn't want to buy a load lock, which cost $50. Even worse, he didn't ask our warehouse for one, which they would have gladly lent to him. He would have been fined if he didn't return it after his delivery. Story 9. My friend Katie made a lot of mistakes. She couldn't give the right change without mixing up a $50 bill for a $5 bill. She broke dishes when she tried to wash them. She ordered way too much milk, 200 gallons more than we needed when we only needed 4. She flooded the kitchen 4 times and even set it on fire twice. We couldn't trust her to close the place by herself or even to help close at all. She did small, annoying things too, like when you finished a big pile of dishes and were happy to be done, she'd wait until then to tell you there were more dishes and just dump them on you. She'd spend a long time cleaning the clean tables and ignoring the dirty ones. If you gave her a cigarette, she'd think it was okay to take as many as she wanted from then on, going through your things and leaving a mess. Then when you needed a cigarette because Katie almost hurt someone by mixing detergent with caramel again, you'd find you were out. I don't think she was lazy or messing up on purpose to get out of work. She just couldn't help but make mistakes. Every possible way to mess up, she'd find it and do it over and over, always saying she didn't know she wasn't supposed to do it. She was one of the most hopeless people I've ever met. The boss had enough reasons to fire her, but every time they tried, her mother would come in and yell at the manager. Then the manager would change his mind and say to just watch her more closely, and we would. We'd follow her around to keep an eye on her, but then we'd have to do our own jobs, and the moment we looked away for just a second, she'd do something like throw away freshly baked cookies because she decided the tray they were on was for stale cookies, even though there wasn't a tray for stale cookies. Despite all her mistakes, Katie was a nice person. I hope wherever she is now, she doesn't cause any fires at least. Story 10. There was this guy, let's call him Randall, who started working at the same time as me. We went through the same training class and he bragged about all the super high-level hacking he's done. He was 18 when he got hired for a sales and billing job at a call center. Randall wasn't making many friends. Between the My Little Pony MLP toys he had all over his desk and how he'd talk nonstop about the next TV series he was going to make a fan dub of, he was pretty annoying. He was never focused on his work and spent more time talking about his special interests. Randall's sales were really bad, probably because he couldn't connect with customers at all. I actually heard him explaining the plot of My Little Pony to an older client in their late 60s, not realizing that the man just wanted to pay his bill and wasn't interested in that weird pony show. Because Randall's sales were so bad and he thought himself as an elite hacker, he decided to go over to a different department's computers. He logged into one of the computers with his own credentials and started placing orders for products that the customers never asked for. This is fraud, plain and simple. Plus, the computers keep a log of when they're turned on and by whom. So, if you're going to commit fraud, don't order things for customers using your own credit card. Without any hesitation, our account auditors checked these accounts, saw Randall's credentials and his credit card numbers. He would give his card to coworkers to order food, and it was no surprise that he got fired soon after. Story 11. I work in a camera store, and part of our business is a lab that prints pictures and processes film. We have a machine that can develop film automatically, and all we need to do is load the film into the machine and change the chemicals every so often. For those who might not know, film is sensitive to light. If film is exposed to light before it goes through the chemical process, it gets ruined and there won't be any pictures to develop from it. One of my coworkers was working on his computer when the film machine started beeping. He walked over to the machine and opened it while film was still being processed inside. This was a big mistake because he was exposing a film that a customer had brought in and paid for. Our head lab technician started yelling at him, saying, "Close it, you're exposing the film." I was nearby as I work in sales and I was shocked by what I saw. The machine has a screen that tells you what the problem is and, more importantly, it tells you when film is being processed. Why did he feel the need to open it? I have no idea. He wasn't fired for this incident, but he did quit 2 days ago. My manager was planning to write him up for a few other things, and we were already looking for someone to replace him. He barely lasted a month at the job. I used to work at a Whataburger, a fast food chain in Texas that's similar to In-N-Out. There were small problems here and there, but one incident really made me want to quit. Part of my job was to bring food out to customers in the drive-thru. At one point, the 3 guys working at the deep fryer decided, with their combined lack of good judgment, to use most of the fry baskets to cook chicken for orders that weren't even being made yet. The orders that were ready to be sent out were waiting for onion rings, which should have been cooking in the deep fryer if those 3 hadn't used most of the baskets for chicken. We couldn't use the fry baskets because management had already scolded us for doing that. While those 3 were just standing around, angry and hungry customers were coming in from the drive-thru asking for their food. Unfortunately, we couldn't help the people behind them because our driveway is designed poorly. It goes from 1 lane to 2 and both lanes were completely full, as was the parking lot. Those guys decided to take their frustration out on me for not putting fries in bags that didn't need them, trying to blame me for their mistakes. I couldn't say anything back because I was busy trying to calm customers down and at least assure them their food wouldn't be cold. It was a full hour of yelling before everyone got their food and things were running smoothly again. After all that, the one manager who was there pulled me aside and said, "I saw you on the cameras, and while everyone was working, you were just standing there chatting with customers." Like, excuse me? I was trying to keep them from getting really upset. Maybe you don't have the 3 guys working a station that only needs 2? Maybe come out and actually do your job of improving the customer experience instead of hiding in the office? Anyway, he said he'd write me up for it, but the next time I came into work expecting to sign some papers, the general manager said he had thrown it out because he knew I wasn't one to just sit around during a rush. Those 3 guys never got in trouble for what they did, but the rest of the staff started to look at them differently. It might not sound too severe when you read it, but when you have customers yelling at you, 3 guys blaming you for not doing their job, And dining customers trying to get your attention or waiting for you, it gets really frustrating, especially when the manager claims to have seen you struggling and, instead of helping, decides to lecture you whenever they feel like it. And if you're connecting with any of these stories so far in the video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 13. I worked in home health care, and my client was moving to a different area. Because the new area was too far for me to drive, I was training someone to take my place. We practiced how to safely move my client from a wheelchair into a vehicle and back again. Things were going well, and I thought the new guy understood what to do. We all felt optimistic. We took my client to the doctor's office, and my client wanted the new guy to handle the loading and unloading by himself since I wouldn't always be there to help. This made sense as I had been the one doing the job alone for years, and the new guy needed to learn to do it on his own. With me still there in case anything went wrong, it seemed like the perfect time for him to try it alone. But things did go wrong. My client told me to go into the doctor's office and check him in while the new guy unloaded him from the car. I should have stayed with them the whole time, but my client was sure the new guy could handle it. We had practiced many times, and my client believed he would be fine. The new guy got my client out of the car and into the wheelchair without any problems. Then he backed the wheelchair away from the car to grab my client's bag and close the car door. But he made a big mistake. He forgot to put the brakes on the wheelchair before letting go. As he turned to get the bag, the wheelchair, which was on a small slope, started to roll backward. I happened to notice what was happening and ran out of the office yelling, "Oh no!" The receptionist came running out right behind me while the new guy was still looking for the bag in the car and didn't see what was happening. The receptionist and I chased after my client. To make a long story short, my client missed his doctor's appointment because we called an ambulance to have him checked at the emergency room. We also had to talk to the local police. The new guy lost his job, and I think he might have lost his new CNA, Certified Nursing Assistant license, because he put the client in danger. Luckily, my client was okay and didn't get hurt. I ended up staying at that job for another 2 months, making the long drive every day while they looked for another person to replace me. When the new person started, they couldn't understand why we were so focused on making sure they knew how to use the wheelchair brakes. That is, until we told them the story of the runaway wheelchair. Story 14. I work for an attorney who helps people who live outside of their home country with their taxes. We had a friend's girlfriend working with us to help clean out old files and set up a new office. She stayed on because we needed someone to do secretarial work. For some reason, she thought that we were all the same in the office with the same jobs like answering the phone, checking email, filing papers, and making copies. But I'm a tax preparer, not a secretary. She didn't want to be called a secretary even though that was her job. She tried to do something helpful by writing an email to ask our clients to send us their tax documents if they hadn't already. This email was going to be sent to all of our clients. She added all the clients to the email and sent it, but she made a big mistake. Instead of sending the email to ourselves with all the client emails hidden, BCC, she sent it as one big group email. This meant all the clients could see each other's email addresses, and if someone replied to the email, all the clients would be able to see that person's private financial information. I had to quickly send another email asking everyone to ignore and delete the first message. She was fired the next day, not just because of this mistake, but because she and my boss couldn't agree on almost anything. She said she knew how to write a legal letter because she took a class on law once, but she really didn't know how. This mistake, however, was just the last straw. Story 15. I used to work with a guy at a job where we delivered building supplies like doors, trim, and windows. I was the driver and he was my helper. Let's call him Pickles. You'll see why soon. Every morning, I would get to work at about 4:30 and be ready to start delivering stuff at 5 a.m. So one morning, I got to work and was looking for Pickles because it was 5 and we needed to leave. He was in the bathroom and he had been in there for 30 minutes having a really bad stomach issue. When he finally came out and got into the truck, he told me, "Oh man, I got so hammered last night, I feel terrible having to go to the bathroom." I asked him if we needed to go stop to get him some water to help him feel better, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, I already did. I drank pickle juice." He then showed me a huge tub of pickles from Sam's Club, and he had consumed every last drop of the juice. I told him that pickle juice is like straight up vinegar, and no wonder his stomach was upset, but he insisted that it was a cure and that it would rehydrate him. We were on our way to a delivery spot that was 20 minutes away, and he made me stop the truck at least 4 times so he could use the bathroom. Then, when we got to the delivery site, he went to the bathroom again. On the way back, he asked me to stop again, and I told him, "Look, just go inside this gas station and get something to hydrate you. Get some water." But he came back out with a large energy drink and a large Mountain Dew and drank them both really fast. He then told me that the summer before, his kidneys had shut down one day while he was working in the heat. I started to understand why. This man got hammered every day and then tried to rehydrate with pickle juice and energy drinks. He continued to have stomach problems all day, and after I finally bought him a big bottle of water, he drank it and said, "Wow, I feel a lot better. Must be the pickle juice kicking in." And if you're thinking this is some kid who doesn't know any better, you'd be wrong. He was 43 with 2 kids and his wife was a registered nurse. This is also the same man who didn't have any air conditioning in his trailer because it broke and his wife and kids were living in it all day during the hot Alabama summer. He got $5,000 back on his taxes, and instead of fixing the air conditioning so his kids wouldn't have to sit in a 100-degree oven, he bought a new $1,000 phone even though his current phone was only a year old. He also bought a new toy but didn't even have money to buy the accessories. Then he told his wife he was leaving her and spent the rest of the money staying at a hotel for a couple of weeks. He was nice to talk to, but he wasn't very smart. Story 16. I used to work on installing audiovisual AV systems for businesses. In our team, there was this one guy who was really not very smart, even though he had a lot of certifications and a couple of degrees. He could work hard if you told him exactly what to do, and he was really good at throwing wires like lassos through drop ceilings. It might sound funny, but I'm sure some people reading this will know how useful that skill is. In the AV world, someone who isn't qualified for much else might be asked to just pull wires. And that's what I had him doing one day, pulling a lot of wires from one meeting room to another through a pipe that was almost big enough for all the wires we needed to run. It's a really boring and tedious job, but it has to be done. Luckily, like a lot of people who aren't very smart, he was always in a good mood and happy to do whatever he was told to do. After lunch, he came to find me and said he was done. When we went to look at what he had done and I found one small problem, when I asked him about it, he said, "Oh, you wanted me to label both ends of the wires?" Yes, we had to use a tool called Wire Tracer to fix the issue, but his question still sticks in my mind 10 years later. Story 17. Medical maintenance here. I didn't see this happen, but I was investigated for it, so I know the details. One of our most common tests when doing any sort of maintenance on a piece of medical equipment is an electrical safety test. At its most simplest, it tests whether or not electricity is properly grounded so people don't get shocked. In the lab section of our hospital, we have a machine that was testing over 200. I can't remember the exact number, samples from patients all across the hospital. Well, one guy wanted to get the electrical safety on it done so he can mark it off his list and not have to come back. So he pulls the plug on the machine, tests it, replugs it, turns it on, presses start, and leaves with a big smile of a job well done. Except the job not well done because the guy had caused an error on the machine from the sudden loss of power, destroying all the samples. Obviously, an investigation starts and the guy has the audacity to blame me. He even wrote my name down on his notes as if I've done the work. He had a particular dislike for me because I had informed the hiring manager to not hire this guy, as I personally knew him and knew he was incompetent. I was saved by 2 very important factors. First, the system keeps a log of who writes what, so it showed he was logged in when my notes appeared, but he argued I used his computer because I was too lazy to log into mine. Second, I was working nights that week. He was fired on the spot. He lasted 3 days in that job. Story 18. I worked for a small software company that made and managed databases for other businesses. After the company fired the only person who understood how several clients' systems worked, I was asked to lie to the clients about where their project manager was and why things were going wrong. I got into trouble after a networking engineer decided to experiment with the client's main server by pressing random buttons to see what would happen. I was the one who noticed the problem after hours and wrote a note asking him to fix it quickly before the client found out. But the client did find out. This situation took a toll on me emotionally because my boss was the one leading the effort to blame me for everything, even though she wasn't supposed to be telling me to lie in the first place. During one conference call I had set up for the client asked why I was even on the call since I clearly didn't care, when in fact I was the only one who really did care, which is why I had asked to be on the call. Funnily enough, the CEO asked me to tell on someone, but I said I couldn't. He guessed if it was the new project manager, but I didn't confirm it. I hoped that would be enough of a hint for him, but he didn't seem to get it. A few months later, I was offered a severance package to leave the company. Looking back, it seems my boss, who had a big ego, and our HR lady teamed up to make everyone believe I had a problem. This was ironic because I had gone to tasting events with coworkers and usually gave away my drink, while everyone else was trying to describe the flavors in fancy ways. My boss's accusations were really a reflection of her own behavior, as she often bragged about getting hammered every weekend, admitted to showing up to high school intoxicated, and even wrote emails while drinking from a large bottle. Story 19. I worked at Wendy's for a while. There was a young employee there with a work permit, so he could only work for about 4 hours at a time. During his first week, he spent his entire 4-hour shift not charging any customers because he thought they would pay at the next window. Of course, none of the customers said anything. We didn't find out until the end of his shift when we noticed his cash register was missing hundreds of dollars. Surprisingly, he wasn't fired, but the manager started watching him closely during all his shifts after that. A similar thing happened when I worked at Family Dollar during a busy holiday season. We were making a few $100s per hour, and the managers had to keep taking the money from our cash registers and putting it in the safe when it got too full. You're supposed to keep between $100 and $200 in your register, and when it goes over that amount, you put the extra money under the drawer for the managers to take later. We had been working like this for hours, and at one point I stepped away from my register to do other tasks. When I came back, I continued to check out customers. About an hour later, the manager came by and counted my register, finding it about $500 short. I was terrified because I knew I hadn't taken the money, but I was scared that they would think I had and take the missing amount from my paycheck or even fire me. For about an hour, I was really upset. I was also 8 months pregnant, so my emotions were all over the place. Finally, the assistant manager came in and asked what was going on. That's when she told us that she had taken the money from my register when I stepped away and then left the building with all the cash to take it to the bank because we had gone over a certain amount for the day. She just hadn't bothered to tell anyone, which is a big mistake. You can't just leave with a couple $1,000s without telling anyone. In her defense, it was a hectic season, and with having to do so many cash drops, some things got overlooked. It happens. I was just upset because I thought I might lose my job and get paid less. I have one more story. This happened before I started the job. The owner's son of a daycare center was asked to fix a broken fridge, and he had one of the kids go behind it to help him. It was a really dumb thing to do. The kid ended up hurting himself and needed medical attention. Because of this, the owner's son was not allowed to come to the daycare anymore, but he would still show up and act like he was in charge. I couldn't stand him. Story 20. I was a store manager at Kmart, and one of the services we offered was Western Union. There was a big problem with scammers calling the service desks and tricking the employees into thinking they were from security, IT, or another department within the company. They would even use the names of the district manager or store manager to get the employees to send thousands of dollars through Western Union as a test. The issue was that once you clicked the button to send the money, it was gone, even if the person in the store hadn't paid for it yet. This was a serious problem, especially in southern Wisconsin, where scammers had already stolen over $50,000 from different Kmart stores. My store had also received one of these scam calls, but the service desk person had hung up on them. I had an assistant store manager who had been with the company for a long time, but she wasn't very good at her job and didn't understand technology, especially Western Union. Even though we trained her multiple times, whenever she was at the service desk and someone wanted to send money, she would just tell them the Western Union wasn't working so she wouldn't have to deal with it. One of the girls who worked at the service desk received one of these scam calls. She immediately gave the phone to the assistant store manager, as she had been trained to do. The company had started firing anyone who fell for these scams because they kept happening and it was a big deal. This assistant store manager then started to process a Western Union transfer for $30,000 as part of the scam. The service desk girl, who was very smart, kept whispering to the assistant store manager, "Are you sure we're supposed to be doing this? We were told not to do any of these transactions over the phone." The assistant store manager just said, "Well, they said the store manager approved it." When the assistant store manager got to the last screen before sending the money, she finally realized something was wrong. She asked the person on the phone if she should really be doing this, and the scammer just hung up on her. Not knowing what else to do, like closing the screen or canceling the order, the assistant store manager simply pulled the plug out of the wall to turn off the computer. I demoted her about 2 months later, but the situation was still a big mess. Story 21. I worked as a home health aide for several years. I really connected with one of my clients, and before long, I became his primary nurse. My coworkers took care of the night shifts and the days when I wasn't able to work. There was an older woman who had been with the company for almost 20 years. She thought she knew everything, and while she was very knowledgeable, it was clear she couldn't do everything on her own. One day, I came in for my shift and did my usual checks while the client was sleeping. I noticed that his medication box had been moved and the number of pills was all wrong. I was the only homemade allowed to refill his medication box, so I called his daughter to ask if she had touched it. The daughter said she hadn't. I checked our binder to see who worked the last shift and if they had mentioned anything about his medications. It turned out it was the older woman who had been there last. I took pictures of her report, the medication box as it was, and the client's current medication list and sent them to our office. After checking the medications and their dosages, I was shocked by what had happened. Some pills were almost double or triple their normal dosage, while others were too low. If we hadn't noticed and had given him those medications as they were, it could have been dangerous. We would have faced a huge lawsuit, and I would have lost my favorite client. The next day was my day off, but I was called into our main office, which was unusual. I thought they just wanted to talk about the medication mix-up and make sure I had corrected it. However, it turned out this wasn't the first time the older coworker had made a serious mistake. She was already on probation for a previous close call. They ended up firing her, and she had to be removed from the building by security and the police. My client and his daughter had to get a restraining order against her after she showed up at his home multiple times, probably looking for me. It was a scary situation, but I ended up moving to a different state not long after that. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.